Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our seminar series on digital rules and human values. This seminar series is brought to you by the Global Initiative for Digital Empowerment. My name is Paul Twomey. I'm one of the co-chairs. My fellow co-chair, Dennis Snow, is also attending. We are presenting this seminar series in conjunction with two other leading think tanks. One is the My Data Global initiative, which is based out of Europe and represents both thought leading and advocacy work, along with a lot of engagement with the commercial and technical community. And the second partner is the Centre for International Governance Innovation from Waterloo in Canada. And we really appreciate their support for this seminar. The seminar series has had a pattern, which is, first of all, we are dedicated as a group towards the concept of people-centered data and digital governance. And that is the basis of the research and analysis and advocacy of GUIDE. But also, we're interested in presenting both theorists and researchers, but also practitioners. And actually, our structure is very much a multi-stakeholder one. We try to get as many people with different backgrounds who are interested in the topic to be engaged. And so the seminar series has a yin and a yang, a cadence which is of one researcher or a couple of researchers talking on one session, and the next session is a practitioner. I think we're very honored today and very pleased that we've got a member both of GUIDE and also of the My Data Global grouping. That is Katrina Dow, who's the founder of Meeco, and also Jan Vereecken, who is the Chief Operating Officer with Meeco. And I'll let them introduce the company itself, but it's been deeply involved in the issues really around digital identity as a form of human governance. And so we're going to think of digital identity as infrastructure here in this session and see how it fits within the frameworks. It should be a very interesting session. I'm going to remind everybody that this seminar is recorded and it is later put up in our YouTube channel, which we have dedicated to the various seminars we've run, and they now beginning to be quite a library of seminars to be viewed. The consequence of that is, if you wish to ask a question in the session, when you put your hand up, we'll take your image and when you're asking the question, and that will be part of the recording. If you prefer not to be noted, then please just write a question in the chat room and we'll ask the question on your behalf. So they're the rules for today. So why don't I get started by saying welcome to Katrina and to Jan. It's great to have you on board. Meeco has been involved for a long time in what I'd say is the sort of the development years of personal identity and verification and the technologies behind that. And we're looking forward to hearing from the team both about their path, what they do now, and the lessons learnt. So, Katrina, I'll pass on to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul. And as Paul mentioned, I'm very proudly a member of GUIDE and then served on the board for My Data Global for a couple of years. But today I'm going to be sharing with you in the capacity as the founder and CEO of Meeco. The name Meeco actually started out of this idea of me ecosystem or the me economy. When I founded the company back in 2012, initially in Australia, and then moved the operations to Europe soon after, because we could see already there was a lot of movement from a regulatory point of view and a citizen-centric digital empowerment point of view that was moving much faster in Europe than Australia. And the idea that individuals would begin to have a digital twin, and that digital twin would be something that they should have some rights and sovereignty over. Our concept has always been about building the infrastructure to enable individuals to transparently be able to exchange data with the people and organizations they trust. So I'll cover a little bit about that, but first I'd love to introduce our Chief Product Officer. Jan, do you want to do a quick intro before I dive in?
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Jan. I'm based out of Belgium. I have a computer science background. Although I started a little bit as consultancy, I saw the light at some point and then veered back into technology and more specifically digital identity. I think was my first foray. and then met Katrina and we joined Meeco in 2019, where I'm now heading, or since then actually heading the products that we built. So we have two big products, which is called a digital vault, a personal data vault, and then now a platform, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. I lead a small group of experts in the field. So we think of cryptography as a specialty, or developing protocols and whatnot, like background infrastructure that almost nobody sees except for the people that have to see it. But yeah, I'm very passionate about this technology. I still think it's one of the most exciting things that you can work on, as you can actually, at least as a father of two, make, I think, a difference for those that come after us, and hopefully leave them in better hands than when we joined, or then at least when I discovered the internet. So nice to meet you.
Thanks, Jan. Vicente, if I can share my screen, if that's okay. I'm just going to take everyone through just a few slides before I hand over to Jan to share a little bit more about our technology and some use cases. And as Paul said, we'd be very happy to take questions afterwards. But first of all, just where we started. As I mentioned, I initially started the company in Australia. I split my time between Australia and Belgium, where Jan and we have a team here in Australia and in Europe. Our focus has always been on building digital trust. Sad to say, that is also extended into mitigating fraud, because we've seen with the explosion of digital life that there's an increase in fraud. But we've always had at the heart and soul of the organization is this idea of a new value or new business models across digital identity and personal data that were not based on actually trading data. And as Jan will talk about, the platform that we've developed is called Secure Value Exchange. This idea that you must have security at the heart of anything that is connected to personal data. Data is only valuable when it's exchanged in some way. And we see exchange very different to selling or monetizing, and that there has to be some value equation in that. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about how that's unfolded over the last decade. As Jan mentioned, our focus is on enterprise infrastructure, so that our aim is to build verified trust into any digital journey. And whilst we have a specialty in digital identity, we also focus on any personally identifiable data. So that could be across health, financial, family, it can be across any telecommunications, it can be across any sector. So I want to give you a quick background on where we've come from. Jan's already mentioned the product that we got started with. I want to look very quickly at what's been a decade almost of things building towards where we see the biggest experiment in terms of digital empowerment unfolding in the EU, and how that's starting to influence other parts of the world, and then hand over to Jan. So where it all started for us is really interesting, because there's another initiative that GIDE is working on at the moment that's specifically focused on artificial intelligence and sort of our data sovereignty. But when I first started the company, there was this idea of what would happen if we could capture our digital twin or all our data and securely hold it somewhere where, with our consent, we could share it, but also into the future, we could have an algorithm. We didn't have the words for agent or AI or any of those things back in 2012 when I wrote our manifesto, but this idea that you would be able to analyze your data and it would actually help you make decisions. So the focus for us has always been in the secure value, that we think that when individuals, customers, patients, students, employees are able to have some control over their data, whether that's something they do directly or through a fiduciary, that being able to have that ultimately leads to making much better decisions. So those could be personal decisions, those could be decisions for how you plan a city, they could be around medical research, but ultimately, the more that an individual is empowered to be able to collect, control, and exchange their data, we believe that leads ultimately to much better decisions in society. And so we started out with this idea of an encrypted digital vault, which enables individuals to bring data from all parts of their life into an encrypted storage. The data can be then exchanged with people or organizations they trust. And we designed this product actually to be embedded into custodian infrastructure. So that could be a financial institution, it could be a hospital, it could be a school, it could be a telecommunications provider. And the idea is that custodian doesn't have direct access to the data, only the customer, the patient, the employee does. But the custodian is able to either build services on top of that or enable the customer to connect directly with other people in the ecosystem to securely exchange that data. So the data is always encrypted end to end. We, as infrastructure providers, we can never see that data. And one very important point that will be a theme throughout our presentation is Meeco never can access, mine, sell, or monetize the data. Our focus is purely on secure infrastructure that we can provide either to custodians or individuals to be able to hopefully transact in a much more equitable way in the digital society. So for data custodians, this also helps organizations that are highly regulated provide a value proposition to their customers where things like GDPR are already built in. So the customer or the patient is in control of the data can't be exchanged ever without their permission, and the data custodian provides that infrastructure as a way of also being able to meet their compliance requirements. Why do they do that? It reduces risk, it helps to mitigate fraud, it provides this data sovereignty and this data control to individuals, so it enables individuals to actually exercise their rights. We have two foundation principles to everything we build: privacy by design and security by design. So it's at the heart of everything we do. And we also believe that individuals should have the ability to have peer-to-peer data exchange. So for instance, our technology is used inside some of the retail banks in Belgium, and we notice every day, not that we can see what's being shared, but we see family members that are using our infrastructure to share sensitive information and make sure that it's secure in the way that it's exchanged. And then this also enables infrastructure for efficient delegation, because the reality is we actually have a digital footprint before we're born, and we continue to have a digital footprint for a long time after we are physically here. And so more and more we're needing to look at ways to manage that pre and post physical life. We're ISO 27001 accredited. Everything we've developed is GDPR compliant. We run our infrastructure in Europe. We have a very interesting design whereby custodians will have access to metadata to be able to actually understand how to build use cases, but they never actually have to see the data value. So we have this zero value knowledge, which means the data itself can be encrypted, but the description can help drive many use cases. And there's some of the things that Jan will talk about. But we focus on identity. There are applications in healthcare, insurance, financial services, and any more. Anywhere where an individual has data that's sensitive, personally identifiable, ideally should be secure, and where they need to have absolute control over what they do and how they do it. And as I mentioned, one good example is of a data custodian is the KBC Banking Group in Belgium. They have 3 retail brands, predominantly Dutch and then French and then multilingual banking applications. KBC Bank have won Best Banking App in the world for the last 5 years, and they have our digital vault actually in their infrastructure. And to the customer, it's quite seamless. It seems like it's offered by the bank. It looks like it's branded by the bank, and the customer knows that the bank doesn't have access to that data, nor do we, but they're able to collect, they can determine what they want inside that. And then KBC has also done some really interesting things to encourage use of and awareness around privacy and security. And they've done some integration with small integrations with their AI agent they call Kate, which encourages you if you have important documentation, to remember that you can save it and you're in control of that. One of the things that also helped with this, people understanding that they needed to save records, was we launched just before COVID in Belgium. And one of the first things that KBC enabled was people to be able to have a safe place to keep their COVID credentials. Before I hand over to Jan, I just wanted to very quickly take you through what's been quite a journey over the last decade, and some 4 papers that we've released. The URLs will be available if you want to see them. These are on our website under Insights. But it's just to give you a little background as to where we are now. I'm very happy that we're probably the most advanced in terms of what we've seen in the market for support for both the ethics and perspectives espoused by GIDE, the regulatory shift that we're seeing in Europe, but also that's really influencing other parts of the world. I'm down in Australia at the moment. I was meeting with some banks and financial institutions in Melbourne yesterday, and everyone's looking to what's happening in Europe, both from the infrastructure, the regulation, but also this idea that Australia wants to make sure that it's part of a larger economy of trusted digital data exchange. So it's very interesting to see that whilst Europe has done this from a regulatory point of view, there are other parts of the world that are pulling the same concepts and ideas towards their markets. So the first thing is, in 2018, we had a big vision for what if. What if there could be this thing called a verifiable credential? What if you could build an ecosystem where you would have banks, telecommunications operators, governments actually trusting each other and enabling customers, patients, students, employees to participate directly in the value that was exchanged? So we wrote this white paper, Zero Knowledge Proofs of the Modern Digital Life, and we made the argument that selling data was a race to the bottom, that both a combination of custodians and fiduciaries, and then technical infrastructure whereby the data could be verified and cryptographically secure, would actually lower the costs of know your customer onboarding, lead to greater trust and lower fraud. I'm very happy to say we published that paper in 2018, and much of what we had a vision for is actually now moving forward in regulation in Europe. I don't know whether we were lucky that we were seeing the future or we were making the future, but either way, we're very happy to see nearly 10 years later that come into place. The next paper that we wrote a small summary on was the European Strategy for Data that was published just before COVID. And what's really interesting, if you look back at this, was a really important piece of thought leadership from the EU, because it was at a time where a lot of the privacy and data regulations were forming, and the EU was looking at the movement of data across member states as being a core right, and looking at what emerged as data spaces. So starting to look at each of the different sectors and realizing that there was absolute value if those sectors could be more open and trusting in terms of sharing. And our argument from that paper was, yes, but don't leave citizens out of that. That's a really important part. It's great that you're doing this in health and mobility, but you want to make sure that you're also bringing citizens into each of those data spaces, because the real value is how a city is used, or how a hospital serves, or how a school evolves to meet the needs of its students. And you can't do that without engaging the individual and therefore having a trusted way to exchange data. Fast forward to 2021 in Australia, we ran a small pilot. Again, we were imagining a time when what is now an ISO standard for a mobile driver's license. So this was a few years that while we were involved with some of the working groups, again, that standard is now hardened and it's forming part of the EU regulation. But this paper was really important because we were able to show that by bringing an individual employee into the onboarding, so we were in the middle of COVID, it wasn't possible for people to physically turn up, and we were able to show that connecting into a government credential, in this case a driver's license, to onboard very specialized engineers, we could do that onboarding digitally, we could improve trust, but more importantly, there were lots of business benefits. And then last but not least, a paper that we published earlier this year which is off the back of 4 very important large-scale pilots, and the paper gives you links to all of those. So this has been funded by the EU, and this is what is considered the biggest digital identity experiment that's ever been held so far. And our paper looks at the summary of what worked, where are the challenges, what's the road ahead, what still needs to be worked on. The good news is that the technology is working, but there's work still to do in customer, citizen education, user experience, and the business models, more equitable business models. But very quickly, if we look at the last decade to where we are now, the idea that we were thinking about was this idea of ecosystems, reusable data, and credentials. We then saw COVID really shifted digital acceleration and helped to educate people around things like credentials and the user experience of interacting in a more digital way. We then have seen this reduce fraud, increase back office efficiency, but we've also seen the power and value of the government acting as an anchor credential, so something that you can rely on from a trusted authority and source. And then last but not least, the digital rights that are at the forefront of what the EU is doing with the EU digital identity wallet, leveraging global standards that have been 10 years in the making, and Jan and his team are down in the weeds on those every day. And then I think what's really amazing about Europe, it's backed by strong regulation. So there is both the incentive from a compliance point of view, but also the clarity. So over the last few years, we've been active in those communities. And what Jan will take us through now is how we've taken 15 protocols, about 150 standards, 4 different ecosystem actors, multiple credential formats into one integration, into one API. And now how we're focused on helping data custodians deliver that secure infrastructure to their customers. So over to you, Jan.
Yeah, thank you, Katrina. Maybe I'll share now my screen. Yep. Is everyone seeing a website? Yeah. Okay, I think Katrina already mentioned it a couple of times, standards and regulation. That sort of, I will repeat that many more times. Of course, we are a technology company. So in essence, we do provide infrastructure, software to enable that. I don't know what level. I can assume of the people that are attending. Yeah, for those of you who are potentially not familiar with what a standard is, essentially can have many forms. So there are standards like ISO 27001, which describe a process that I think a lot of companies do around security posturing and whatnot. But there are also a lot of technical standards when it comes to how 2 systems do a particular exchange of data or store data. And the journey that we've been on in the last, I would say, at the very least 6 years, very intensely, is following a trajectory. What often, and I was drawing some things and remembering some things off the cuff, but that was people have called self-sovereign identity, decentralized identity, a word that changed a lot. But essentially this concept that where Katrina's idea in the very beginning started from, that how can I own my data and I'm not just a bystander in the exchange of it. And out of those ideas, an incredible amount of ideas essentially materialized and proposals were made on how that could look like. And what over time, and I would say relatively soon, the community that was looking into that, people, companies were landing on a system such as the one that I'm showing here. I think this is very crucial to understand. Again, maybe apologies if people maybe find this very obvious. That could be, but for those that don't, allow me to quickly at least introduce it. So before this concept, there was essentially data was exchanged between what is here represented as an issuer and a verifier. So an issuer is something or someone that is a source of information of attributes, and they send that directly to somebody who wants to rely on that data, like often called a relying party, but in would say this parlor they often refer to as a verifier. But of course, then the user is in the middle, but they participate in that exchange, but are not in full control. So we were thinking on, okay, how can we control that? And that's where this concept of a wallet was introduced. So something, a piece of software essentially that a user can control, and they and only they would have the power to allow or send data to the relying party. So the issuer no longer needs to know where the data was being used, how it was being used. It's first transferred to the user, and then the user is showing that to the verifier. Like the very idea of the digital vault that Katrina was talking about already allows that. That's end-to-end encrypted exchanges of data. And then there's also this trust provider. Again, maybe this is already more technical detail, but essentially when you do it like this, then there needs to be something or someone that brokers the trust, so that when the information is received by a verifier, you can actually trust it. And what I will talk about in a minute, and hopefully also show you something, as to not bombard you with slides, is to demonstrate how essentially these red arrows are now being standardized and being, in Europe especially, being pushed and forced onto member states by regulation to implement, to hopefully create an infrastructure that everyone can use to exchange data in a more secure way and in a more privacy preserving way. So far, the good news. The bad news, I would say, is that this is incredibly complex. Katrina showed it on her last slide, was that approximately 150 technical standards are in play to enable that. These two simple lines that I was explaining in reality contain a lot of technological complexity to enable that. And how that comes is that through regulation, for example, and I'm taking Europe as an example, but we can talk also about other areas of the world who maybe have a different push. But in Europe, at least, you have an EIDAS regulation. They create implementing acts, which can sometimes are also updates to already existing implementing acts, which reference standards. And essentially, from the top down, they reference other standards, and then it becomes this incredibly this complex nested web of standards. So the number 150 is that's what people agree on, that like 150 of these blocks are necessary in order to implement fully the EIDAS 2 regulation. And that EIDAS 2 regulation is described by the European Commission in many documents. One of the more important, or people who want to know every little detail, can read this document, which is called the Architecture and Reference Framework, where in an incredible detail it is described how this is to be done. And then essentially all these implementing acts then reference the standards in order for companies and essentially companies and governments to do that. So what do companies as us do? We are the people that actually read these things and then try to implement systems to then sell. We are a for-profit company, so our job is to sell them to companies and provide them this service. And essentially, we have people on staff who then are becoming experts in this, as we find that, or our sort of position is that this is almost impossible to quickly pick up. Again, although these are two simple lines, in practice, this of course becomes very complex. And then the platform that we have covers the 4 roles. So the 4 roles that I was introducing earlier. Here, the issuer, the wallet, verifier, and the trust. That's something that we as implementers of this technology can help organizations and governments can help with to, of course, enable their use cases. And as a result of that, we believe that for the citizen, the user, but also actually for companies, the outcome is better. They are now in more control there is better security and there are much better privacy guarantees than the systems that came before us or that came before them. Now, when preparing for that, I thought, okay, I need to show something because that always says more than just words. So if everything is then on the right, you should see an application. Is that correct? Yeah. So this is the European reference wallet. So this is open source software that the European Commission made available. So it's free in the sense that we as European taxpayers, of course, fund this everything. So this is, for those who live in the EU, this is where some of that money is actually going to. But this is really so the EU Commission had as an idea, we want to kickstart this whole process, and we're not going to just, this is the regulation and good luck, everyone. No, they're actually providing an enormous amount of resources for governments and private companies to understand this and to actually be able to work with them. And I thought I'd show you two little things, two very quick demos. Hopefully that will give you an idea of what is this EU wallet actually and see it in action essentially. So the first one, where you could use it for, not in every country, but that's a different discussion, but one of the use cases in Belgium at least could be that to use it for bank authentication. So I vibe coded a quick website just to demonstrate to you the concept. So from my government, in my case, that would be Belgium, they will make available an application. We already know that it's the MyGov application, which already exists in Belgium. They will make available a credential that is called a PID, Personal Identification Document. And this PID will contain information about myself. I loaded it with some dummy data. The name is not Erika Mustermann, but that's a very commonly used German persona that is used for testing. But it will contain all kinds of attributes. What I show here is by no means exhaustive. And then you could imagine that in order to log into my bank, they want to be sure that they identify me, and when they do that, then you can actually log in. So from the user perspective, this will be super simple. They will have this wallet, an issuance process will take place. I'll demonstrate issuance process with something else also in a minute. But once you have that, you just click on, and now I hope that the demo gods are of course with me as we are doing this live, but there are many ways to do this, but what I'm showing here is to work with some QR codes, which by now lots of people are familiar with. So I've scanned this with the EU reference wallet implementation. The website is coded by us, it uses our platform. So this is already the interoperability, the standards working together. And it is asking me, the wallet, to present the PID that I was showing earlier. You can have selective disclosure, a really important feature that is critical in this whole thing. So I'm sharing certain information that is critical to identify myself. I do give my PIN code to authenticate the release of the document. And then it's sent to the bank. They verify if everything is correct, if it's from a trustworthy source, and then boom, you are in. So this is the use case that most people will talk about, identity. This, I think, is also one of the biggest flaws of the whole thing. Yes, the PID is a really important credential in some countries, I would add, for example, Germany, who, for whatever reason, I can imagine actually the reason, have a hard time with the concept of identity. For them, it's quite revolutionary to have something like this. For me, as a citizen of Belgium, I have this for many decennia, and it's actually very easy to log into all kinds of websites with my EID. And lots of, I think, Northern European countries also have the exact same thing. But earlier, I was talking about that this is actually infrastructure. So identity is just one component, because I've seen sometimes online that people are then commenting, oh, they think it is only an identity wallet, but that's not the intention of the European Commission. To demonstrate that, I quickly want to show you this. This is a test website that we use to quickly issue credentials. But now we're actually going to put a new thing, a new credential, a new piece of data that you as a user can control into the wallet. So as you can see, it just has an MDL, mobile driver's license, and a PIT. And I'll now go through a similar, or yeah, I can actually demonstrate. I'll use Google Lens. I scan, I open it. It asks me which wallet I want to open it. I think, wait, let me do that again. That's probably in the wrong wallet. Okay. Okay, the one is up top. Yeah, so here I'm demonstrating how I issue a cinema ticket, which is, again, it's the same infrastructure that I'm using to prove something highly valuable. My identity can also be used to do something trivial as an event ticket. So I add this to my wallet. It's asking me to input the code that I'm showing on screen, and boom. So now in the same wallet that where I had my MDL and my PIT, I now also have a cinema ticket. This is what they call low assurance. There's the security requirements are much less. This is much less valuable, but I think the critical thing, at least I'm excited for us as users, is that these are also very important use cases. So we no longer have to rely on the Apple Wallet or Google wallets of this world to do that. This same infrastructure can be used for something like this. And then you could imagine, and here, let me see, what was it? Yeah, cinema. Again, this is just a demo, of course. But then the same process that I was showing earlier, I can then use to present at the cinema gates. I could use this and then share the cinema ticket. So I think the potential that is, so this used to be all proprietary technology that is used for that. Now, if companies and governments and organizations want that, it can drastically lower the barrier of entry, and I think open an incredible amount of use cases to the general public, where use cases that were before sometimes could cost a lot of money or had a high barrier of entry. So these are two simple use cases that exchange the same thing, the credential, which is essentially a piece of data that some source, an issuer, attests to that, this is correct, and then at the other side is given to the user, so it's in full control of the user. Which the vessel that the user uses is this business wallet, this application that it's using to then, when they choose to present at the verifier. This can be online, but this can also be proximity. So when you're tapping on a gate or whatnot. So that journey, that's essentially what we are doing, is understanding the technology, implementing all of the technology, and we've helped some organizations actually build this wallet, integrate it into an existing bank application in this sense. We've also helped issuers to issue credentials, but I would say the most common use case is actually on the verifier side. There's lots of interest to consume these identity credentials at the moment. So I think that's I think for this audience, I cannot tell a lot more about the technical thing, but I thought that demonstrating, I don't know how many of you have seen it, but this is, again, for all of those who live in Europe, this is hopefully coming relatively soon. At the end of the year, every citizen should have this. What we have seen is, of course, around the globe that lots of other governments, Japan, Australia, lots of others are also looking with a lot of attention to this, because this means that relatively soon, hundreds of millions of Europeans will have this. And this also opens up very interesting use cases that we're looking into with digital travel credentials, for example, abroad. And we are looking into hotel check-ins and whatnot on how we can facilitate and improve efficiency for that. So while this is Europe is a very big has a very big regulatory stick, as we call it, and they have an incredible amount of rules, and sometimes people can find this very tedious. The underlying principle I can't stress enough, I'm very excited about as somebody who really cares about privacy and security. This is built for the right reasons, with the right, all of these standards are essentially just best practices that people, very smart people, much smarter than me, came up with as, look, this is the best privacy preserving and secure way to arrange this exchange of data. I'll maybe hand back to, I don't know, Katrina or Paul, but I want to hand back into
maybe come to Q&A.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Katrina and Jan. I think that was excellent. I've got one question I'd like to start with, but I'd also definitely like to see people who've got interested in a question. Perhaps you can put your hand up on using the Zoom tools. The present use of this technology tends to focus a lot about the wallet in imagination sense. It's the stuff in a wallet, and it tends to be single transactional, and a lot of it's directed not only with sort of government trust sources as being verified, but also for government use, right? Get your driver's license, use it to get into your car registration insurance that I had to do just recently, or a similar sort of government use. You've got examples there of get an airline ticket. It's one at the moment. Buy something and like the ticket. Is this a technology that can be used where the terms of your, as we've argued in GIDE, and which now are sitting in potential draft legislation form, or at least discussion forms in front of the IMCO committee in Brussels, where if you have an expert advisor who's worked with you in a group to help you to come up with terms that you'd like to have with an online provider for in which you then get some value for your data, can this be the technology that sets up a standard format? And so that they can access, the interactions can happen automatically because the format's been established and it's been agreed. It doesn't require the consumer to keep going in, putting stuff into it, checking the QR code, putting it into the wallet.
So I think there's a number of questions there, Paul, and I think let's break them out, and maybe Jan's the best to talk about the scheme side of it, which is the rules. But the first thing is, I think the most unfortunate thing about the wallet is that it's called a wallet. If it was called secure container, I think we would be able to have people stretch their imagination, because the reality is we think of wallet and we think of the form factor of a mobile phone or an app. The reality is, and EU is now also working on a business wallet. I wish they would say container, secure container, because your refrigerator will have a wallet, your car will have a wallet, your coffee machine will have a wallet, and your coffee machine in your refrigerator will also know the food that you regularly order. It will also be pre-authorized to use your credit card. You'll probably have an agent that does your regular shopping. And so that secure container, which is taking information from your fridge that might also be helping you manage your health, that's the perfect use case where in an ecosystem around that you may want either a fiduciary or a representative that says, we want you to be able to have greater either buying power, or we want to make sure that you're part of this clinical trial and that we're helping to make sure that data is exchanged securely and it's not tampered with. Or you've just purchased a new car and we recognize that you can do a lot as a driver to contribute towards design and safety, and we actually want you to be incentivized for that. So the interesting thing about what Jan has shown us in this four-party model is you have the issuer, and you have the verifier, you have the individual, but you also have this thing called the trust scheme. And the trust scheme is basically a set of rules for an ecosystem of who can participate and help facilitate the sharing of that data. Jan also showed on purpose two extremes: a government credential for the banking sector, highly regulated, and you want the government as a trust anchor because that's called high assurance. But he also showed something that's really low assurance, which is something like a cinema ticket or an event. It could be World Cup, it could be soccer, it could be enrolling at university, it could be any number of things that you do at a kiosk. And then the other thing about the secure container is this can be machine to machine. So you don't even have to have QR codes and all of those kinds of things. The scheme can basically say, set the rules. So you might say, for the purpose of this clinical trial or for this purpose of participating in energy offset or giving energy back to the grid, I'm going to authorize, first of all, this data to be collected and cryptographically signed and turned into a credential. And then I'm already pre-authorizing that data can be transferred in accordance with these rules. And so I wish we didn't call it a wallet. I wish we just called it secure container. And then if you say secure container, you can think of all of the different devices, appliances, and parts of our life where that secure data can be managed. And then if you think of scheme as a set of rules, then you have actors on either side that are able to represent the best interests of the individual. And then one step further, it doesn't have to be always an individual. In fact, in the not too distant future, it's probably going to be your agent that is doing this. And then you'll need a clear mandate for how that agent will operate on your behalf. And yeah, if you would add anything to that?
No, I think there are some other questions. So no, I agree with that.
Yeah, so you should say it could be container, it could be repository. I think I've heard that word used before.
Yeah.
And I think what you're also saying is that the regime or the scheme, that could be, again, it could be if there's representative experts for groups of consumers, you could end up with 20, 30, 50, 100, 300 different schemes for access to something or other. And the rules can be different and the transactions can be different.
You might have an energy scheme, you could have a mobility scheme.
But you could have 400 different schemes for energy.
Completely.
Yes.
Yeah. But interoperable across those various schemes, and then hopefully globally interoperable as well, which is really the strength of the standards.
Yeah, one of the things I worry about in this is that because the models are coming out first from government, and those government services are not segmented. Everybody gets the driver's license. Everybody gets to.
I looked at it's the chicken and egg, as Jan said. I also reside in Belgium half the year and contribute to more to European taxes. But the reality is that Europe has seen that unless you kickstart it, it's really hard to get it. They've kickstarted it and also they've prescribed open standards. So companies like ours can take those standards and build a product so that you can have a marketplace. But by the same token, you know that if you're investing in building this infrastructure, there's an ecosystem. So I think if it wasn't for that investment, it's often very hard to kick it off. So in the UK, I was in the UK last week, and the UK are going about this in a very different way. They're certifying the technology, but they're not prescribing the standards and they're not prescribing the interoperability. They're working on much more of a trust list, and they've got some very specific use cases. And so there isn't necessarily a right way or a wrong way, but having an actor make the investment and build the trust, I think, is a really important kickstarter. And then the ecosystems can form as a result of that.
Yeah. So we've got questions. First of all, Fen and then Dennis.
Thanks. That was a terrific presentation, extremely interesting. Looking at it from the point of view of financial institutions which are using this technology, which provides, as I understand it correctly, a whole new level of privacy and security for the consumer. Is there a danger here that bad actors who want to money launder, engage in other kinds of fraudulent activities will also find this an attractive technology? And if one is selling it to financial institutions that are supposed to have comply with government rules on money laundering and other kinds of things, is this going to make life more difficult for them? That's a big issue here in Canada, for example.
No, I would say that the way that I feel, at least again, the European Commission approaches this, and again, not spokesperson for them, but this is my interpretation, is that they're going to categorize you. If you want to do high assurance use cases, like the one that you're like in that area that is regulated, then it will require certification. You will need to get onto trust lists and whatnot. So it's going to be quite difficult. There'll be barriers for these fraudsters, I think, in order to actually participate. But what they intentionally didn't want to do, which I think is also an interesting concept, is not to say everyone, doesn't matter what the use case is, you need to get certified. So they're very explicit about we want to also allow these, like the cinema ticket that I say, to also be able to participate. Now, will that last category find, will there be fraud? Of course, time will tell. And knowing people, likely yes. If there will be a loophole, some will find it. But on the other hand, yeah, I think they are putting also in place ways, technological ways, but I guess also regulatory ways, enforcement rules to police that and to control that. That would be my view.
I think, Fen, what I would add to that is that for bank onboarding, anti-money laundering, KYC, the idea a credential is not going to replace either the collection or the type of information. One of the things it will do to help mitigate fraud is, unfortunately, currently a lot of those documents are either scanned or photographed. They're emailed, they're intercepted by email, they're abused, they are requested over and over, and then they're saved unencrypted on servers at banks and insurance companies. And data leakage is one of the biggest problems. So I think that the technological advancement as we move into the credential world is it's the exact same thing as you taking a photograph of your driver's license and emailing it. It's just that the ability for that to be tampered with or taken or corrupted or reused or represented in another way, we're eliminating a lot of that. In terms of fraud, yes, if there are loopholes, as Jan says, people will try to exploit them. And that's part of the reason for these high assurance government acting as a core anchor. So it's not going to change those processes, but what it's going to help to do is move a lot of that behavior offline and the adjacent issues of data breaches, data leakage. I got another email yesterday from a trusted provider to say, oh, so sorry, we were hacked and your data, yeah. So is this the perfect solution? No, of course there will be, it's human nature to try and hack the system, but this is going to mitigate a lot of data breaches and data misuse that are happening right now.
Thanks so much. That's terrific.
Dennis.
Yeah, mute.
You're on mute, Dennis.
Good, our internet connection holds up. This was a terrific presentation, and I just have two questions. One is, obviously, we would love to live in a world where everybody's information was in a vault. First question is, I can see why businesses would want this. Consumers who are tied to platforms may be in a different position. If you use Apple Pay all the time, do you have an incentive to avoid using your vault? And the other is, how do you anticipate in the long run, will there be lots of competition among many vaults? Are there returns to scale here? What is the future of vault industry?
I think, Dennis, and I hope I caught all of that with your internet connection, but I think the short answer is, again, this is why Jan and our team are committed to standards-based technology because there should be choice. There needs to be choice. And so our technology right now, KBC Bank is the custodian, and a customer might only choose to have financial related data. That's not the case. They offer the opportunity to manage all types of data, but there's no reason why you wouldn't necessarily why you have to have a single vault. So you may have something embedded in your bank. You might also have something together with your medical records. And part of the value of these standards is that you can then have vault-to-vault interaction or wallet-to-wallet interaction and exchanging things. And so that's a really important part of, and as Jan showed, we were using our infrastructure together with the reference infrastructure from the EU, but we could have had the same infrastructure speaking to a refrigerator or to a car. And then I think if I heard your other question is that yes, it will require some change of behavior, but again, what we're already starting to see with AI, and this is something that KBC Bank has shown, is that you do something that's digital, and then the agent says, hey, Dennis, that's valuable. Would you like me to save that in the vault, or would you like to categorize that for me? So what we'll start to see is agent assistance to help you recognize when you have a piece of data that's personally identifiable or valuable, or that you might need to use again, or you may want to make sure is safe, that will actually help with some of that administration. And I think the sad part, having been working on this now for more than a decade, the vision that we had when I first wrote the manifesto in 2012 was really blue sky. I look back now and recognize that everything we were imagining was not possible then. We didn't have the building blocks that we have now. And we had some of those building blocks, but we didn't have some of those connecting pieces that actually end up making it a better user experience. But there should absolutely be competition. This is not about one vault to rule them all, but ideally some common infrastructure so that things can talk to each other, so that there's both choice, but there's also a way of being able to decentralize from a security perspective as well. My life is split between two countries, and right now it's very hard for me to try and do anything with my bank in Belgium that works with my bank in Australia and vice versa. We'll need regional solutions, we'll need global solutions, but ultimately what we're hoping is we'll see bridges built between each of those solutions.
Before I go to Nick, it seems to me that a key point there, let's call a spade a shovel, that Android and Apple have a strong competitive advantage because of their operating system sitting on top of every phone that everybody has. And this idea that things are wallets, everybody's going to see it, they're going through their phone. So the European Union has quite specifically gone out and said it has to be open source and made the space available for others. And I think it's going to be important at a national level around the world as this gets deployed, and it's not saying that Apple and Android should not participate in these markets and be actors. I'm not saying that, but we need to be careful that they don't end up with just a natural duopoly because of the control they've got over the phones. Let's turn to Nick.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for the great presentation. I just wanted to ask about one kind of potential use case that's in the news today, with Australia and Canada both looking at social media bans for kids and trying to find ways to verify age. Do you see that as a good use case for this technology? Would building wallets for kids and teens be something that you're looking to do and governments are looking to get you to do?
Jan, do you want to talk about the over X credential?
Yeah, of course, they are looking into that. I do realize that there is if you have age verification, which apparently is very different from age assurance, but it is definitely being looked at within within Europe. They're not necessarily want to put all their horses on this particular kind of technology. There is also some frustration around that, but I think it would be a very good fit. Now, look, whether or not children should have these things, yeah, I don't know if that's possible. From what I understand, they are looking into people that are from 15 years old or something will have the government. So it's not for smaller children. It's definitely not a target audience. But okay, if we're looking into over 18 use cases, that's I guess a very good fit for think the gambling. When I see the rise of gambling websites and how that is proliferating over the internet and how easy almost it is to, I think, participate in that. Although, I've never been there, but I imagine that it's not that difficult, especially with crypto and whatnot. We're facilitators in that. So yes, I think it's very much a use case that is being thought about. And Katrina was referencing, very often you will hear about age over claims. So instead of disclosing your date of birth, which is typically something that you do now, you show your driver's license or your identity card and it shows your full date of birth, and actually it's not the venue or the service doesn't want to know that, but it's the only way that they can verify that in the near future. In Australia, you can already do that. You will have age over 18 claim and an age over 65 claim and an age over 21 claim. Couple of these which you can then present instead of your date of birth, which you would do in the past, where you're actually oversharing information. So absolutely.
So it's more privacy preserving. And the other thing that we haven't talked about is delegation or acting as a guardian or a custodian. So it's the kind of thing where a parent could actually have some nested credentials. So a credential to say, this is my child and my child is under 16, over 16, or whatever the case may be. What you could imagine is that kind of information being available, but to a guardian or a custodian. And again, as Jan has said, one of the big use cases in the UK, because the UK was one of the first to introduce some age regulation for gambling, accessing pornography, is this proof that you are over a legal age to access that kind of content. But I think we'll see more of those types of age-related claims or a specific claim that will actually help with entry or barrier to certain services. Sorry, Jan, didn't mean to.
Yeah, maybe, just to add on to that, what we've also seen in New Zealand, especially, I think that had to do with indigenous societies who were, according to what I understood, were sometimes less technologically evolved, in the sense that you can't necessarily expect them all to have phones. So this technology, although I'm demonstrating it on a computer with an Apple showing showing where I live, of course, in the world, it can also be, of course, not with all the same security benefits, but you can also do this in an analog way by printing out certain things. Again, you lose some of the security things, but that's also something that's been at least considered, which I think is also always nice. And I'm mentioning this because it could also be used towards children, but also towards older people who or whatever let's say the reason is that somebody doesn't want to or cannot participate in this. Because as Paul is saying, sadly, the form factor especially is everyone seems to focus on the wallet, which is all, and I see that as an app on a phone, which I also don't think it's great. But as Katrina says, it doesn't have to be. But what I maybe wanted to add there is that you always have to rely on some technology. So you always need some kind of advanced technology. So you will always have to trust somebody in the end. There's just no going around.
I agree with you, Jan. I'm interested to see how the European member states will implement this with homeless people. And there's going to be 5% of the population at least or more who are going to be in flux. People have had to run away to women's shelters, refugees who arrive with their documentation, all manner of things. So it's going to be interesting to see. Now, they've had to deal with that in the offline world, and so we need to see what the answer is going to be in this thing. Can I just ask a question, perhaps using your four-party diagram? What's the business case? Who pays?
I was in Copenhagen just the last couple of days, and we had a session on this. And we ended up that coercion is the business case, Paul. So essentially, somebody has to coerce somebody else to, yeah, you'll have to do it. No, but that was one of the more interesting ideas. Actually, somebody brought it up, and it was quite nice. And he gave the example. I think it was from the US, where I don't think it probably doesn't exist now under the current president. But there used to be a time that companies could report another company if they thought there was some malpractice, and then they would, and if that malpractice indeed existed, they could receive 10% of the fine. So something like that. The group came to a conclusion that's probably one of the avenues. Every other avenue, like what everyone agreed with, is that transaction-based is not the way to go. As soon as you do transaction-based billing, you inevitably end up with you're going to hit privacy, because somebody then needs to know about every transaction. Another potential way is flat rate. So this is, for example, what It's Me in Belgium does, is that you say to a relying party, hey, I want to rely on your data, and I'm going to pay per user that I want to verify. I pay a flat amount, whether I check the user once or I check them 1 million times over the course of a year. That's none of that. We will not report that, but I'm gonna pay that. But the business model is not easy, because a lot of the time, if then you have to report when you used it again, then this might be technical overkill, and you could as well stay with existing much simpler technological.
Into the chat a link from our website. I'm sorry, I meant to add this in the presentation, so it's great that you've asked the question. I've just sent a link to business models, because the question we get asked all the time, okay, if you're not monetizing the data, we think there are 2 new business models that will emerge out of this ecosystem, and that's net new value or time to value. So the net new value, we've given 7 examples where you are either doing something like you're verifying the data, you're mitigating risk, you're managing fraud. So you're actually creating some new value in the ecosystem that is offsetting that cost or improving that outcome. The other is time to value. And again, when you get access to the presentation, that small use case that we did in Australia, the back office savings were the incredible thing. So we were very focused on the technology. Isn't it wonderful? Mobile driver's license, employee onboarding, it's all digital. But the HR practices reduced from, I think one of them was 48 hours to 30 minutes. And so we also talk about net new value, or the time to value. So that is, if you can start to join up an ecosystem of capabilities. So for instance, a use case that we're working on at the moment is around travel. So if the airline and the hotel and the tour operator and the event, so we've just come from Berlin, from the Global Solutions Summit. You imagine if the same information could be used the whole way from booking your ticket to enrolling and registering, the value chain of that, what we're starting to see is that time to value, saving time or making that user experience. So encourage you to look at that. We'd also love feedback. But we've been asking ourselves, and we've been asking the question to our partners and the community for more than a decade. If you're not going to monetize the data, then what is the business model? And we believe the business model is either around the new value that you create as a result of this, or the way that you have an improvement in terms of the speed or the outcome.
Yeah, and your comment reminded me of the domain name system, where you buy a domain name. It might resolve once a year. It might resolve a million times a day, but the pricing's all basically the registration.
Yeah.
And so your answers, but that's common for a lot of these very large scale systems, right? They'd end up being that way.
Also, just to mention very quickly, we didn't get into it today, but we've been working alongside, as Jana's talked about, a lot of forming EU regulation, including the Data Governance Act and the role of the data intermediary. We were always clear from the get-go. We wanted to focus at the infrastructure level to provide technology to allow an ecosystem to form. We never wanted to reuse that data. And the whole role of an intermediary is to be able to provide that secure pipes, that secure infrastructure. and to allow ecosystems. In our white papers, we've posited how we think those ecosystems can monetize and how everyone can benefit, but we've never seen the business model in terms of monetizing data. Yeah.
Len, can I just close with this question or observation? These repositories could also, am I right, they could support not just the sharing of data, but also smart contracts?
Yeah, you could so you could have the scheme, yeah, which is the rule. Yeah, and then you could have the sharing. So for instance, let's just take mobility for a second. So you could have a mobility ecosystem. You could have data that the car is collecting. So it's not like the driver has to say, oh, please, I have to remember to download my journey. So you could be very clear about the data that was going to be collected. And then the agreement for what was going to be shared, making sure that it's anonymized. And then in terms of how that might be financially incentivized, there's a whole range of things that you could do. That ecosystem may be supported by smart contracts or some sort of fractional or tokenized incentives. This then takes you off into technology and other ecosystems, but of course that's possible. And all the rules would be preset in accordance with that exchange of the data.
Well, to come to your point, that the key point I think we're both going in the conversation is you could have a system of expert advisors who could negotiate all manner of terms on behalf of groups of users where neither the expert and advisor nor the people running the technology underneath it, like yourselves, know about the transactions.
Or ever saw the data. Or ever saw the data.
But the payment processes went from the people to the consumer.
Yeah, of course.
So you can monetize without giving away the data about the transactions.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Look, when we say we've never wanted to ever support the monetization of personally identifiable data, because the reality is, and this is the equation that we always talk about for value, data is most valuable when it's accurate, it's real time, it's in context, and it's matched with intent. So if you know my date of birth, and you know that it is accurate, you know that it's up to date, and you know that I'm applying for something that's age related, so there's some intent, I'm about to do something, then that piece of data is so much more valuable than it might be to a data broker trading it. And so we always encourage our partners when they're thinking of use cases to think of that value equation. If you can be sure that the data is accurate and verified, that it's timely, that it is connected to some intent or outcome, then it's incredibly more valuable than if it is just a 1 and a 0.
Okay. There are no more questions, so I think that's a great point on which to finish and to say thanks very much to you, Katrina, and to you, Jan. That was a great presentation. Lots of hands clapping I can see on the screen here. It's wonderful that we'll have this seminar now available to come up on our YouTube channel. Remind people that's digital lives, human values, or digital values, human lives. I tend to get that confused. Santiago will correct me on that, but which is supported by GIDE. And people exhort you to share this with other people. Please share the message out on your networks to say this is a good thing to come and have a look at. And I think today's presentation has yet again reinforced the value of being able to bring legal and research and political science and policy considerations together with a community that's actually doing real things and getting dirty fingernails and having to make a crust for a living, and what they've learned from that process and bring that community together. So thank you to you and thank you to everybody else, and we'll see you next time.